All right, so we're going to turn the stage over to Major Dan Walters with the Royal Canadian Air Force. So let's hear it for him.
Check. Can you guys hear me? Yep. Oh, wow, that's loud. Okay. Hi. So my name is Major Dan Walters. I'm here from the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, to talk to you guys a little bit about TFRs, how to avoid getting intercepted, and what to do if you do get intercepted. This is me. So a whole bunch of time flying up in Canada on the Hornet. A little over 10 years as an alert pilot. Also fly paragliders, GA aircraft. And since last year, I've been down at NORAD headquarters. I also have Mr. Chris Edling with me. He's going to help me with questions later on. He's been at the headquarters, I don't know, since the 50s? Yeah, a long time. All right. Cool. So why are we here to talk to you today? So I'm going to play a little video. This is you're doing your standard day. You fly the same route every week. Or you fly the same local flight every week from your small airfield. You just go to take off, and this happens to you. So a fighter shows up on your left wing, rocking his wings. He drops some flares, and he flies in front of your nose. So we'll talk about what that means later on, but that means you are getting very close to being in a very bad spot. So you're getting very close to, at the very least, talking with the FAA, maybe talking with law enforcement, and at the worst being shot down. So that sign to you is things are going bad, and you better know what to do about it. Okay, so what we're going to talk about, we'll talk about what NORAD is, who we are, why we're here. We'll talk about TFRs, how they're built and how they're operated. We'll talk about intercept procedures, and if there's some time at the end, we'll talk about some other little airspace procedures that cause problems for us. So what's NORAD? NORAD is the binational command, the only one like it in the world. It's both the USA and Canada, fully integrated. Canadian fighters fly in U.S. airspace, U.S. fighters fly in Canadian airspace. The headquarters in Colorado Springs, where we work, it's fully integrated. You pick up the phone, you talk to somebody, you have no idea if they're Canadian or American. The commander of the Canadian NORAD region is Canadian, his deputy is American, and vice versa in the continental U.S. So it's a pretty cool thing. Established in 1958 to defend North America against the Soviet threat, and it has evolved since then. Okay, yeah, what's our primary mission? Track Santa. So you might have also heard that we track Santa. That is something else that we do. But more importantly for you, what do? We do aerospace control, which means we maintain control of the airspace of North America and respond to any unauthorized air activity. Okay, so what does that mean? So during the Cold War and pre-9/11, that meant looking out. So we had radars all around the outside of North America. We were focused on a singular threat, and that was Russia. So that changed when the Twin Towers went down. So we stopped looking outwards exclusively, and we realized that, hey, there's also an internal threat that we need to look for. Built up relationships with all the other government agencies, built up the radar coverage inside the country, set up alert bases at places we never had them before, and started training for a new mission, which was defense against a terrorist threat. At the same time, Russian aviation started flying again after the end of the Cold War, and where we are now is we're really looking at both threats. So we look at an external threat from primarily Russia, and an internal threat from bad actors. So why do you care? Why do we care about some guy in a Cessna? Well, because some guy in a Cessna could load that up with a couple 100 pounds of bombs, fly it into a stadium, or fly it into somebody important. It's expensive what we do. So when we have jets on alert and they have to fly air patrols and intercept people, that costs a lot of money. And it also puts us at risk of a very dangerous situation. So realize that if you ever get intercepted, there's somebody on the end of a phone line who has the authority to tell that jet to shoot you down. So things have gotten themselves to a point where there are very few safeguards left, and we want to avoid that situation in the first place and make sure we don't get there. Right, so if you bust a TFR, yeah, you might get a talking to if it's innocent, but if it happens more than once, or if you're complacent about it, or if you avoid the directions of the fighters or try to avoid the fighters, the consequences get worse. And that's not to scare you. That's because we don't want to end up in a situation where we're shooting somebody down. Okay, so when do we actually intercept aircraft? So if there's any unauthorized entry, so if you fly into the national capital region without authorization, if the president is in your area and there's a TFR in place and you violate that TFR, or if you violate the ADIZ, so the Air Defense Identification Zone that surrounds North America. We can also respond to threats from an FAA or airline request. So if the FAA has somebody that's been NORAD for an hour, they may request we go and see what's going on, especially if they go off flight plan, they deviate from their flight rules, they report an in-flight disturbance. So if somebody reports that there's been an attempted cockpit breach or they squawk 7500, then you're probably going to have a NORAD response to that. Okay, so who do we actually end up intercepting? Yeah, we intercept a few Russians once in a while, and every once in a while we'll intercept an airliner who's out of comms, but for the most part, it's general aviation pilots, and that's why we're here at Oshkosh, is to try to reach as many people as we can, because this is incredibly common. So, I mean, my background's up in Canada. We would deploy up north all the time. Once in a while we'd intercept an airliner, but we didn't do a lot of GA aircraft. Since I got down to the headquarters, it has blown my mind how many people violate TFRs and how many people get themselves very close to really bad situations. So I'll give you an example. Who here flies around New Jersey? Anybody? Yeah, do you guys know where Bedminster is? So that's President Trump's golf course. So that is where he's going pretty much every weekend for the summertime. And when he does, they set up a TFR there. And let me tell you, I did an 8-hour shift in the command center where I don't think we stopped. It was almost continuous violators of the TFR, including a few that got intercepted. So those guys are not exactly happy campers right now. Why does it happen? Incomplete pre-flight planning, so you don't bother checking. Maybe you check your departure NOTAMs, your destination NOTAMs, but you don't pull up the TFRs. Or maybe you fly the same route all the time and you're just flying local, so you don't bother to check TFRs. And you're not in comms. So you're on a 1200 code, or you're not squawking at all, and you're not talking to anybody. And those are the guys that get in trouble. Okay, so why do we have TFRs? Yeah, I mentioned a few of them already. So the president of the U.S., he's going to have a 30-mile TFR wherever he goes. Big events, so Super Bowls, space launches. So we'll see those a lot on the east and west coasts. Air shows, forest fires. Now NORAD's not going to necessarily be involved in any of those, but any of them that are a security that have a security nexus, we're going to be involved in. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about presidential TFR. So this is the most common one that gets people in trouble, and they're all pretty much structured the same. So this is an example of the president visiting San Francisco, and you see you have some overlapping rings. So there's overlapping rings because he moves around. So those are all published ahead of time, typically 48 hours in advance, and as he moves, the TFR moves with him, and ATC is going to know that. They're typically surface to 18,000. And the gotcha here is that if you live near somewhere that's got a Class B, and you're used to flying underneath the Class B, so you don't have to talk to anybody, right? That does not apply to a TFR. So if you think you're good because you're flying underneath the Class B and you didn't check for TFRs, the TFR goes down to the surface. There's typically an inner circle, which is a 10-mile radius, and an outer circle, which is a 30-mile radius. And we'll talk about exactly what those mean. Okay, so what do we say about TFRs? Our motto that we give to you is 3 things. Plan, and preferably a flight plan, but at the very least, go to the TFR website. It's really easy. It's one click. I'll show you. Check to make sure there's no TFRs. Squawk, have a discrete code given to you from ATC, and make sure you're talking. So probably the best one of all these is talk to ATC. At least even if your VFR get flight following. Okay. How do you know when there are TFRs out there? Well, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can do some pre-planning that I'll mention here in a second, and you can get those pushed to you. So there's an email list, there's a Twitter feed. You can get it all sent to you so you know when there's a TFR coming up. But more importantly, before you step, go to the website right there, tfr.faa.gov. Really easy to remember. You click on the map button, and you see all the TFRs in the country right away. And the legal requirement is to call 1-800 weather brief. So if you call 1-800 weather brief, you get your brief. You have flight planned to the FAA's requirements. If you fly with ForeFlight and you rely on that, that's cool, but you need to update that. So if you've been out of signal, if you've gone fishing for the weekend and you haven't gotten back into Wi-Fi to update, realize that might not have the most up-to-date TFRs. Okay. Okay, so you can get them emailed to you if you go to this website, www.faasafety.gov. There's a link on the right. You can sign up and get emails. So every time a TFR pops up, you get an email about that. And you want local air safety information. So there you go. Or if you're a Twitter person, the FAA has a Twitter account or a handle at VIPTFR. If you follow that, they'll tell you all about the TFRs. AOPA has one that might be a little bit easier to read, hashtag TFR alert, and that's going to also give you all the information about the TFR. Okay, this is what I do personally when I go fly in a 182 or a T41. Is I go to tfr.faa.gov, I go to the top, I click on FAA map. It gives me a map of the states, and I look at Colorado where I live, and I see that there's no red rings, and I know I'm good. If I see something, like I see one of these red rings here, you can double click, it zooms in, you can click on it, and it'll give you all the information about that TFR, so you know when it's in place and what the procedures are. And it's going to be really easy. So it comes up with a big map, shows you exactly where the rings are. It's got a description down the left, so you should have everything there. So it's a really easy check. Go to the website, click on the map, look at your state or the states you're going to be flying through, and make sure you don't see any red. If you do, check it. Okay, and we always say the best source is 1-800 weather brief. Call up the briefer, tell them where you are, tell them where you're going, and they will fill you in if there's TFRs en route. Okay, for devices, yeah, make sure they're up to date. I already mentioned that. And make sure it's set up to display the TFRs. So if you have the thing decluttered because, I don't know, you live somewhere where there's always TFRs and you've deselected, realize that you're not covered anymore. The other thing that we say is give the TFRs a buffer. So if you're flying off your iPad and the guy in the FAA is looking at his radar scope and it's got a drawing of the TFR, it doesn't matter if your GPS is more accurate than his radar. The violation is going to come off of what's drawn on his scope. So if you're relying on just avoiding the TFR instead of talking to ATC, then give it a couple miles buffer. Okay, what can you and can't you do inside a TFR? So TFRs are not exclusion zones. It doesn't mean you can't fly within 30 miles of wherever it is. The way it works is there's a 10-mile inner ring. Typically, this is a typical presidential TFR. The inner 10-mile ring is completely no aircraft. So unless you're specifically cleared by the FAA to operate in there because you're law enforcement, because you've obtained some kind of a waiver, or you're a scheduled air carrier, you're not going to go inside the 10-mile ring. Within the 30-mile ring, though, that's a 60-mile diameter, so that's a pretty big area. You may still want to operate. So what can you do? If you're VFR on a flight plan, you're talking to ATC, and you have discrete codes, you're not squawking 1200, you can pass through that 30-mile zone. No problem. If you're IFR and you're passing through, you're talking to ATC and you're on a discrete code, obviously, because you're IFR, same thing, no worries. If you are doing a full stop landing inside the 30-mile ring, that is also okay, but you need to be on a flight plan, you need to be squawking a discrete code, you need to be talking to ATC, and same for departing. So all those things apply. Typically, pattern work's not going to be allowed for the period that TFR is in place, unless you have some kind of specific waiver from the FAA. One thing we say, if you are VFR, you're not on a flight plan, do not go within the 30-mile ring and give it a buffer. If you are in the TFR and you're canceling IFR for whatever reason, and ATC tells you to squawk 1200, do not squawk 1200. Go back to them and say, hey, I'm in the TFR, can I get a discrete code? If you start squawking 1200 inside the TFR, that's going to set off all of NORAD's scopes, and we're going to be looking at you. Okay, yeah, so or you can avoid it entirely, which can be pretty onerous, so you don't necessarily always want to do that.
Looks like we got a question here for you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
So the question is, if you're VFR with flight following,
Yep.
can you transit you're not on a flight plan, but you've got a discrete code. What's your situation?
Well, I would ask ATC, because They're the ones that are talking directly with the air defense sector. And do you want to field that one? Oh, I would say that if you ask them, hey, am I cleared to transit the TFR? And they say yes, you're good. Now, if you got flight following half an hour ago and you haven't talked to anybody in a while, maybe you would want to check with them. Does that answer your question? Cool. Is there another question?
This pertains to the website that you referred to.
Yeah.
How often or how frequently is that updated to prevent pop-up TFR incursions?
Right, so it's updated all the time. The typical pop-up TFRs you're going to get are firefighter TFRs. Those things can pop up like that. The security TFRs, like I said, those are going to be a 48-hour notice for the most part. But if you call right before you leave, and most importantly, if you talk to ATC, that's what's going to help you. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
I got your weather briefing then, and had one pop-up thing, and you have an advance notice on that, or? If I'm talk to a weather briefer,
Yep.
and he had one of these pop-up ones come up, will he have advance notice to let me know about this?
Yeah, he'll like, so if a TFR is gonna pop up, as soon as it's in place, all these agencies are gonna have it, right? As soon as it's being enforced. Yep. Now, you might take off and a firefighting TFR comes into existence while you're airborne if you're up for a few hours. So that's why you need to talk to ATC. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Lost comm procedure. So this is all great, but what happens if you have an electrical failure or a radio failure? First one, don't enter if you lost comm. So if you are IFR or if you're VFR or you're in visual meteorological conditions and you lose comms, do not enter the TFR. If you're in the TFR, squawk 7600. That's going to get everybody looking at you. Don't squawk 75 or 77. So maybe put it to whatever you are, 01. Move it over 76, put it back to 00, or turn it to standby, put it back on. If you're VFR, leave in the shortest direction. Point directly out of the TFR and leave. And if you're IFR and you're in cloud, obviously you just follow your lost comm procedures. Okay, a couple gotchas. So if you do a multi-leg trip and you check it all before you go, and it's going to last you all day, recheck the TFRs for each leg. If you are departing VFR and you're in that 30-mile zone and you don't have comms on the ground, make sure you get a hold of ATC before you take off. So give them a shout on the phone to get that squawk so that you don't just pop up at 12 miles from the center of the TFR with a 1200 code, because that's going to get people very excited. How about if you're out camping for a week, right? This is the Canadian thing. You go out to the middle of the bush and then, you don't have signal, you don't have comms, you don't have cell phone. Well, you do the best you can. So as soon as you get airborne, get a hold of ATC or get a hold of an FSS and just check in with them to let them know where you are. Okay, any other questions on TFRs?
Canadian numbers are 1866.
Right, so if you guys ever go to Canada, this is a great question. I don't think I have the slides in here, but it's the same number, but 1866. So 1-800-WEATHER BRIEF, change that to 1866. And the Canadian website is flightplanning.navcanada.ca. If you missed that, I can get it to you afterwards. And in the Canadian system, there's no specific website for TFRs. So if you guys all go up to Canada, go hunting, go fishing, maybe just go sightsee, you're just going to have to check NOTAMs to find them. The good news about TFRs in Canada is we don't stand up security TFRs very often. So usually if there's a security TFR in Canada, it's because there's like the Olympics or the G20 summit or something big, and they're gonna have an advertising campaign ahead of time to try to reach as many people as possible. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on TFRs? Okay, next I'm going to talk about intercept procedures. So what happens if you do everything right, you check it ahead of time, but you start flying and there's weather in your way, you start diverting around the weather somewhere you didn't plan to go, you lose comms, so you're not talking to anybody because your radio died, and somebody shows up on your wing. Well, excuse me, a few myths before we start. So, if you fly a small aircraft and you think, yeah, you can't go as slow as the fighters, that doesn't matter. That doesn't mean we're not going to be able to intercept you, and that doesn't mean we're not going to be able to prosecute you. So as part of my job at NORAD, I fly 182s and other GA aircraft as a practice target for the F-16s in Denver. And let me tell you, it doesn't matter how slow we go, they can always intercept us, and they can always execute the mission. So the reason they can do that is because they're always up there as a pair. So they have sensors on board, they have radar, they have targeting pods, and they have a pair of them so that they can cycle. So if they can't slow down to your speed, when they show up on your left wing, they'll pass your left wing as slow as they can, and then his wingman's going to do it, and they're going to keep that loop going. So do not try to fly slow, and do not try to evade. So realize that if that fighter's showing up at you, that guy's on the other end of the phone, ready to maybe give that order if he thinks you're nefarious. So if you slow down, descend, start maneuvering, that's going to look really bad. We'll fly as low as you guys fly. So it's an operational mission for us. We don't have any altitude restrictions. And if you land at your buddy's field and take off in his pickup truck, just realize that we can still follow you and figure out where you went. Okay, so don't try to avoid us. First of all, when the fighter shows up on your wing, you want to do everything he says to avoid that dangerous situation. Okay, where are these intercept procedures located? So we have a bunch of cards over at our booth. So if you go over to the government partners booth, I think I got that. I think I'm a little off on the acronym there, but if you head over that way, we've got a booth set up with all the other government agencies, and we've got kneeboard cards in there. They've got all the planning tips on them, and on the other side they have all the intercept procedures. So something you can just throw in your bag. And it's also, of course, in the AIM. Okay, so what's going to happen first? So you show up in a TFR. You didn't know you weren't supposed to be there. What's going to happen first? The first thing is going to be ATC. So before NORAD starts intercepting you, ATC is going to try contacting you in your last frequency. They're going to try 121.5. So if you have two radios, nothing else to do with the other one, don't just turn it off and leave it on ATIS so you can turn it back on real quick. Put it on 121.5 so that you can hear if somebody's trying to get a hold of you. You may get a relay from another aircraft too. Okay, if that doesn't work, if they can't get a hold of you, then you're going to probably get intercepted. So fighters might be on ground alert from somewhere, so they may be scrambled from ground alert, or if it's a presidential TFR, oftentimes we'll have aircraft overhead. So they could be already overhead, ready to intercept. And typically we're going to do this with 2 aircraft. Okay, how's the initial intercept going to look? So that's an F-16. He's passing the left wing, rocking his wings. So a fighter passing your left wing, rocking your wings, that tells you you have been intercepted. He starts a gentle turn to the left, which means follow me. So if you read your ICAO procedures, rocking your wings means you've been intercepted. A gentle turn away means turn and follow me. Okay? You turn, follow him, and then you establish comms later. That's the order you want to do it. So you want to show him, hey, I'm compliant with you. I'm not trying to ignore your direction. Okay? Okay, who could show up on your wing? It could be anybody. So it doesn't matter where you are. Guard units in the States fly F-15s, F-16s. Up in Alaska, there's active duty flying F-22, and there's Canadian Hornets. And realize that just because you're in the States doesn't mean it might not be a Canadian fighter showing up on your wing, and vice versa. Okay, it's whoever's closest to, whichever NORAD asset is closest is going to intercept. Okay, if you are intercepted, remain predictable. The worst thing you could do is slow down, evade, and more importantly, descend. So do not descend. Be predictable with your altitude, heading, and airspeed. When you see that wing rock off your wing, acknowledge with a wing rock. Let him know that you see him and that you're going to comply with him. If your radios are working, come up on 121.5. So the interceptor isn't even going to bother with whatever frequency you were probably last on. ATC will still try that. The interceptor is going to be on 121.5. So switch to 121.5. Just let him know that you see him. Ask him what he wants you to do. If you can't get a hold of him and you can get a hold of ATC, obviously talk to them. And you're going to hear something like you see here. So this is the armed air defense fighter on your left wing. You are in a security TFR. You're ordered to immediately to turn left to heading 360 and exit restricted airspace. And those warnings are going to get more and more escalated the closer you get to whatever he's defending. Okay, so I mentioned the follow me maneuver. So this is on our kneeboard cards, and this is also the standard ICAO procedure. So he rocks your wings, and about a 30-degree turn to the left. And all he's looking for you to do is turn and follow him. So there's the fighter off his left wing, gentle turn through about 30 degrees of heading. You turn and follow, and everything is de-escalating, okay? Okay, let's say you managed to get a lot closer to the president or the Super Bowl you didn't know was on, or whatever it is that they're defending before they get to you. Or let's say you showed up on your left wing and you were playing on your iPad and you didn't even hear him or see him because you got your music cranked and you're playing Angry Birds. Well, this is the next move, and this is what's going to hopefully get your attention. So we call this a headbutt. The fighter's going to fly across your nose, either above your flight path or below your flight path. He's going to endeavor to avoid putting you through his jet wash, and he's probably going to be dropping flares. This is what that looks like. So the fighter again rocks his wings off the left wing. You see the flares coming out. In this case, he's going to fly above your flight path, but high enough that you're not going to go through his jet wash. Flares across your nose. Okay. If you ever see that, you are getting very close to a very bad situation. You need to turn. So in that case, he flew left to right across your nose. Turn to the right and follow him immediately. If you can't stick with him the whole time, take a 90-degree right turn and continue in that direction, because you're getting really close to whatever we're defending. Okay, so let's say you're calm out. You can't talk to the fighter, but you see him and you follow him. Okay. The next step that's probably going to happen is he's going to take you somewhere to land, so that the FAA can get a hold of you on the phone, maybe law enforcement if it's gotten to that point. If you see the fighter pass your wing, take you by an airfield in a descent and put his landing gear down, that's your signal that he wants you to land here. Okay? So if you're calm out, you can assume that he's gotten you clearance to land there. If there's a tower there, obviously look for the lights, but you need to land at that airfield. Okay. Now, is it always going to be that you're going to get forced to land by the fighter and, the FBI or the Secret Service is going to throw you on the ground and cuff you? No. Okay? So if this is an innocent mistake, if it's the first time, you may not even have to land short of your destination. If you start talking to ATC and everything looks like you're compliant. But regardless, you are probably going to have to get on the phone, at least with the FAA, and see what the consequences are going to be. Now, if you get to the point where he's done headbutts across your nose and you get directed to land, there's probably going to be law enforcement on the ground, or the interceptor is going to stay, and you'll see him flying around the airfield where you land, just making sure you stay there till law enforcement arrives. Okay, so that's the intercept procedures. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
In the past, didn't they use Blackhawks, or do they still use Blackhawks?
Yeah, and I'll talk about the National Capital Region here in a second. So for the National Capital Region and for presidential TFRs, we'll often have them. It's not Blackhawks that they're using now. It's Coast Guard, and I always get it. It's MH or MH-65 helicopter. So it's a big orange helicopter. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. Yeah.
Thank you for taking my question. I fly in New Jersey, and we have a lot of TFRs now. The president goes there all the time.
Yeah.
If I get intercepted, F-16, I'm flying at 172. I can't keep up with him.
Yeah.
So what is your suggestion?
Right. So obviously the first thing to do is get in comms with him. If you can't get in comms with him, after you follow that initial compliance turn, so after he gives you the direction to turn, follow me, you turn and follow him, he's not going to be able to stay on your wing, right? So you're asking, how's he going to show you where to go? What you can expect is him and his wingmen are going to continuously pass you on your left wing. So what you'll see is them doing like a straight line off your left wing, and they may do a gentle turn. So they do a gentle turn to that heading, they're going to roll out, they'll stay on that heading for a little bit as they pull away from you, and then you'll see them do a really hard turn. When they do the really hard aggressive turn, they know you're not going to follow that, so stay on the heading you're on and wait for his wingman to pass you on your left side. And again, if he does a gentle turn, I would follow him. If he does a really hard turn, that's just him repositioning.
All right. right, thank you. I was trying to use that as an excuse to get a faster aircraft. You know?
Yeah.
Would you ever get intercepted for anything other than a TFR, like flying into restricted airspace, something like that?
Could you ever get restricted for? Yeah. So you don't need to be in any restricted airspace to get intercepted. So if you're NORAD for a long period of time, so that we think that either you're hijacked if you have enough people on board, or maybe you're incapacitated, then that could lead to an intercept if the FAA asks for assistance. Other restricted airspace, so like we'll talk later on, there's some other ones like the P areas. If you were to go into one of those, you could expect that could result in an intercept. I don't know, do you have any other examples you can think of? Cool. Anybody else? All right. Okay, we'll talk real quick about the Washington, D.C. area. So who here flies around D.C. now? You guys got your certificates? You've done the online course? Okay, cool. How easy was it to do that online course? Was it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if you plan to fly anywhere near DC, and I'm not talking like 10 miles of DC, I'm talking a 60-mile radius, so 120-mile diameter on the eastern seaboard near DC, there's an online course you have to do, and I'll have the link here in a second. If you go to that website and you do that and you print out your certificate, you will know everything you need to know about flying in that area. I'll get a few of the highlights here, but that's the bottom line. If you want to fly anywhere near there, you have to go to the website. You have to do the course online. It takes like an hour, and you have to print out the certificate to do it.
How long is that valid for?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't think it expires. Yeah. But it will probably tell you on the course. Okay, so what is the Washington D.C. Special Flight Rules Area, or the CFRA? You'll hear it called. It's a 30-mile area around D.C., and in fact, out to 60 miles, there's speed restrictions as well. Service to 18,000. You need to have two-way radio. You need to be on a discrete code. You need to be on an IFR or CFRA flight plan. There's airspeed restrictions, and you have to have done the course and have that certificate with you. Why is that there? Because around D.C., we have a lot more defensive measures than we have anywhere else in the continent. So there are fighters that are specifically configured for that mission on a heightened alert status at Andrews Air Force Base, and there are surface-to-air systems like you see there should the fighters not be able to intercept. So there is a much more robust defense system there, and we want to make sure that we avoid miscalculation. Okay, so there you go. FAAsafety.gov, that's the same one that you can go to sign up for those email alerts. And you go through the course, and you get a certificate, print it out, fly with it anytime you're around there. Some other things that you may see around there, so somebody mentioned the helicopter, that's what it looks like. And they actually have a little signboard out the side. So if they pull up beside you, they'll have this little thing. It'll say like, you are violating a presidential TFR. Come up 121.5, turn to follow me. So, is there a video? Yeah. Thanks. There you go. You have been intercepted. And those guys are pretty quick, so they actually do a fair amount of intercepts. And they're typically located at towards the center of whatever they're defending. So if you're a light aircraft, you can expect that you might see them. Okay. There's also a visual warning system. So if you ever look at the ground and you see, I'll play the video here. I think it's red, red, green. That means you're violating restricted airspace, and you need to turn. This is like an eye-safe laser, so you'll see how bright it is here. At nighttime, it's really obvious. In daytime, you'll see. So I think it starts with a daytime video. Nope, nighttime video. So there it is. So if you ever see that out your window, red, red, green, and you know you're in that area, that's a signal to you that you need to turn and exit the CFRA, come up on 121.5. Okay. Here's what it looks like in the daytime. So you can see just that red, red, green, red, red, green, red, red, green. So if you start seeing red, red, green, and I think there's a couple different sites, is that right? So if you start seeing red, red, green pointing at you from a bunch of different places, that should be cueing you that you need to pay attention to where you are. Okay. Any questions on the DC CIFRA? Okay. All right. The Air Defense Identification Zone. So it goes all the way around North America. And you think, well, when am I ever going to be leaving or entering North America? I'm not an airliner, but if you look at it, actually can get you where it happens a lot in the States is off the coast of Florida. It'll happen a lot, and then up in Canada we actually have it go overland in a few places. So there's a few places if you're flying up north in Canada, go hunting or fishing, you might run into this. So you need to be on a flight plan, either IFR or what's called defensive VFR. Your flight plan needs to be activated, and you need to be in two-way radio contact. Okay? You'll have a discrete code from ATC, and you need to notify them prior to your penetration of the ADIS. So let's say you go to the Bahamas, you finally get up the courage to take your single engine over water that far, and you're coming back in. You need to have all that done before you hit the outside line. If you start flying in here and you don't have that done, the air defense sector that picks you up on radar is going to start processing you, and they need to make a decision as to who you are, what they're going to do by the time you get to that inner line. So you need to have all this done before entering it. If that means calling up ahead of time because you're not going to have good comms, or if that means orbiting and climbing until you get in comms, you need to do that before you enter the ADIS. Okay, any questions on the ADIS? Okay, this slide just show you a little bit about MOAs. So in the United States, military operating areas are all over the place, and you can legally fly through an active MOA if you so desire. Has anybody here ever flown through an active MOA to cut a corner? Yeah, cool. So sometimes there's only a couple guys in there, and sometimes they're not. So this is a picture of, is this a red flag, I think? Yeah, that's Nellis, right? And all those symbols you see there are aircraft. And just to give you a scale, so from this blue guy here to this green guy in the back, that's only 15 miles, and you see the density of aircraft there, and they're all maneuvering in aggressive manners. Now they're all deconflicting from each other because they have training rules they're following. But if you are just flying through there, it is not necessarily a safe thing to do. In Canada, we use restricted airspace, so you just can't fly in our airspace. But we have more space. Okay, what else might you run into? So the top left there, you see that in your chart, that's a MOA. So again, you can fly through that, but we recommend that you do not if it's active. The one on the left, P40, so I think it's P40 Camp David. I can't remember which number that is. So there's a bunch of these permanent areas around the country. Those are permanent restricted areas. You cannot fly through those. These are low-level routes. So if you see one of those, that could be fighters that train down low. So be at least 1,500 feet AGL or higher, and keep your head on a swivel. Alert areas is the middle one here. So there's so that's one for student military student training. Just like a MOA, doesn't mean you can't fly into it, but there's going to be a high density of aircraft there. You see the DC CIFRA on the bottom one. We already talked about that. Off the coast, warning areas. So if you fly off the coast and you're like, well, there's a warning area, it's just a warning, I can fly through that. That's exactly like MOAs. So it's outside of sovereign. It's outside the 12-mile sovereign limit. So it's not a restricted area, but there's going to be a high density of military aircraft in there if it's active. Okay, and then you have a restricted one on the top, which obviously you can't go into. So there's a lot of different kinds of airspace. How can you know before you take off and before you talk to ATC, am I going to be able to fly straight there, or am I going to have to make a 200-mile detour? Well, it's easy. So again, an easy website to remember, SUA.FAA.gov, special use airspace.FAA.gov, and that's going to tell you all of the active airspace with times. So let's say you live near Mountain Home in Boise, and there's a huge restricted airspace that's between you and where you want to go. Before you take off and find out you have to take a 2-hour detour to go around it, you go to this website. It's pretty straightforward. You select what you want to see. You select the times at the bottom for when you want to see what's active, and it's going to give you a map, just like this, and you'll be able to tell whether you're going to be able to fly through there or not. Okay, any questions on special use airspaces? Cool. Okay, so we talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about TFRs, how they're set up, how we enforce them. We talked about intercept procedures, and we talked about some other special use airspace. But, you know, if you remember nothing else, here's what we say. Plan. So file a flight plan. And if you're not going to file a flight plan, at least do your own planning. Check to make sure there's no TFRs that are going to be active in your area. Squawk. So get a discrete code, or at the very least, have your transponder turned on, and then talk to ATC. Talking to ATC is probably the most important thing. If you can talk to them, even if you're VFR just getting flight following, that is going to help you avoid trouble. Okay. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Could you give us the website for subscribing to the TFRs?
Yeah. I'm just going to flip back here. I think it's FAAsafety.gov, but I'm just going to click back. Sorry for this. It's probably a more efficient way to do this.
Something like the second or third slide.
Yeah. Here it is. There you go. Yeah, FAAsafety.gov. Yep. And that's the same place you can go to do the Washington, D.C. course. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Thanks very much for your time, and I hope that I don't see you.